The U.S. Department of Homeland Security is responsible for defending our country at its borders and throughout the interior. To do this, the Department of Homeland Security has over 240,000 employees, with more than 140,000 of them in law enforcement positions. That's more than any federal law enforcement agency in the executive department. DHS was established in the aftermath of the devastating and disturbing September 11th attacks that set shockwaves through every American. We witnessed true sacrifice, heroism, and a united resolve against evil in the months and years that followed. Today we're joined by Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, the seventh person to head this department, and a man that the Fraternal Order Police has worked closely with over the years. He is familiar with the challenges facing law enforcement at all levels in government. And prior to his time with the Department of Homeland Security, he served as a prosecutor in California. I'm Patrick Yoes, National President of the Fraternal Order Police, and this is The Blue View. Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us for our podcast. It's an honor to have you here today. You've been a working relationship with your department has been great, and we appreciate the feedback and interaction that we've had, and allowing us to be part of some real big challenges facing our country. Before we get into our discussion, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, a little bit of your background?
Well, President Yoes, it's my honor to be on this podcast and be able to speak to your members. I'm very honored to do so. You know, I was born in Havana, Cuba. My parents fled the communist takeover of that country. They didn't want to raise their daughter and their son, my older sister and I, in a communist regime. And so they were able to come to the United States. And I grew up in a devoutly patriotic home. And that is what led me to join the federal government on September 25th, 1989, at the first possible chance I could get to become a federal prosecutor. I was a federal prosecutor for 12 years, an assistant United States attorney, and then the United States attorney. And the proudest moments of my career have been when I've been able to stand up in a federal courtroom and say, Alejandro Mayorkas on behalf of the United States of America, and vindicate the work of the law enforcement on the street and prove our defendants guilty of the crimes for which they were charged.
Yeah. You know, I need to, if I could, and I know I spoke to you about this before, you know, law enforcement is going through a lot over the last 2 years. We've sort of in transition. It's our job to improve the criminal justice system. And sometimes that process is not easy. And we've certainly been part of that. And there have been a lot of, I guess, attacks on law enforcement. And one thing that that stood out, and I have to thank you for it. In October, after COVID restrictions lifted, we were finally able to have our memorial service, and we honored the over nearly 500 fallen law enforcement officers at that service. It was a really long service. It was on the lawn of the Capitol, and it started raining during that event. And you know, as people would do, they normally get out of the rain. But it was a solemn event. It was to honor our fallen, and I have to recognize that you sat there in honor of those officers through the rain and left, something that most people didn't do. And I'd like to just show a picture, if I could, of you doing just that. So I want to thank you for your honor for law enforcement. It meant a lot to our members, and it's not something that went unnoticed. You know, sometimes it's the things that people don't, you know, you don't call attention to that really tell your character. So I want to thank you for that honor of our fallen. Where does that come from?
Well, President Yoes, you know, quite frankly, families were out in the rain to remember and pay tribute to their lost loved ones who died in the line of duty. And I'm sitting here today able to participate in this podcast with you because of them and their sacrifices. And so rain is not going to keep me away.
Well, I can tell you that our members were quite impressed, and it really touched a lot of people that you stood there. Most people left, and I'm not taking, you know, I'm not discrediting anyone else that went there. They were all to show honor, but you went that extra step, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. You know, you've heard me tell this story before.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a kid, my parents had me tumble out of our car, and whenever we saw a law enforcement officer with a badge on the street at the street corner or stoplight or what have you, I was ordered to get out of the car and approach the law enforcement officer and shake his or her hand and say thank you, because my parents didn't grow up in countries where law enforcement protected them as they do here in the United States. And so, what I say to law enforcement at a time when we're under attack is we're the largest federal law enforcement agency. Resolve is a really important human quality. We believe in what we do. We're proud of what we do. We know why we signed up to do good for our country, and so we march forward.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And, it's an interesting story and one that I've heard you tell many times. And boy, only if we had more parents like that in America.
Yeah.
Instill those principles in their children at an early age, positive qualities. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to talk about a few topics, but I'd like to start. If you look across the country, we see rising crime. It's really in some cities, it's a major crisis, and trying to combat that is not an easy process. Most law enforcement in this country, the vast majority is local law enforcement that have kind of the boots on the ground. And your agency also has that responsibility to deal with these same issues. And our interaction with the Department of Homeland Security, local law enforcement, through grant funding, through task force, all of these things are vitally important. We've been signaling our concerns about the rising crime for quite some time now. Can we talk about your perspective on the rising crime and how partnership with Department of Homeland Security, various agencies within Homeland Security, how this interaction is helpful for us to combat?
President Yoes, our role is to equip and resource local law enforcement around this country through our grant programs. I am very concerned about the funding streams for law enforcement. We ourselves, despite we have a big budget, but we also have very big expenses. We need to be resourced, and local law enforcement needs to be resourced to match the level of crime that we're all encountering. There are also a number of other factors at play other than, I think, under-resourcing. We have a tough time recruiting personnel because law enforcement is under attack. But also, I see people in the criminal justice system making bail that wouldn't have had a chance between 1989 and 2001 when I was a prosecutor. An individual who commits a crime with a firearm, that's a tough bail to make back in the day. And yet in speaking with police officers and deputy sheriffs in different parts of the country, I hear about people making bail pending trial. And I think that creates a danger.
Yeah, and look, I'll go back just 3 weeks ago. We lost 3 officers in 2 incidents with people who were violent offenders, violators of violent crime, and firearms, with firearms as well, only to be released on that revolving door. And as a result, we had three law enforcement officers who were killed. I'd love to say that I wish I could tell you it's just limited to us, but there are literally thousands of people who are being victimized by this revolving door of the criminal justice system of people, violent offenders. We all know in law enforcement that the vast majority of crime is committed by a very small percentage of violent offenders. And by taking those violent offenders off the streets so that they can't continue to victimize, the people we serve, well, that's how we combat crime. And so if you look at the increase in crime, it's directly related to this lack of consequences for, that 10% or so that is really creating most of the havoc in our country right now.
I couldn't agree more. And, the standard was pretty straightforward. I think it still is the standard. I just don't know how it's being applied, which is, are there conditions or combination of conditions that can ensure the safety of the public? And if not, the individual remains in custody pending trial.
Absolutely. And it's a tale of two cities. Look across this country. You have cities that are doing just that, and they don't have the rising crime. And you have cities that are quite honestly, doing social experiments that are costing people their lives.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge that we all have. You mentioned grant funding and some of the programs that you have to support law enforcement. Can you talk about some that really stand out to you that I think that our listeners would love to hear?
Well, I'll name one that comes immediately to mind because the border is such a tremendous challenge for us, and we can talk about that more, President Yoes. But we have a Stone Garden um, grant program that distributes $90 million to local law enforcement along the border to meet the challenge of the border, because not only are our Border Patrol agents so severely taxed, but local law enforcement is taxed when individuals are crossing illegally into the United States. You know, they need to be apprehended. There are those who evade law enforcement. They create a danger for communities, and we've got to fund law enforcement so that they can pay overtime. They can get technology. They can have the funds to equip their departments to address the challenge.
Yeah, I talked to our members along the border, and there's clearly a lot of frustration by the volume that's coming through. I think it was some 2 million were detained last year alone, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, that volume is creating havoc not only for those local law enforcement agencies, and I'm sure that grant funding is helpful, but since you brought up the border, let's talk a little bit about that. It's clearly a challenge that we have of trying to manage the border and the amount of the volume that's coming through here, into the country. And I know that you and I have spoken on a number of occasions, or I've heard you speak on a number of occasions, talking about the humanity of what's happening at the border. At the same time, recognizing our border security and the challenges that we have there. So, if you could just talk a little about the challenges we have, how the department is really going about trying to curtail this. What's the most effective and efficient way, and what is our path forward?
Yep. So I will tell you the frustration of the individuals, with the badges on the ground and the holstered firearms is earned.
Yeah.
We need to be very clear about that. And our Border Patrol agents, their morale is down, and I understand why. A couple points. One is, we're not alone in facing this challenge on our border. If we take a look at Colombia, for example, they've got more than 2 million Venezuelans right now in their country. 2% of the population of Costa Rica is now Nicaraguan. The economic conditions that made worse by the pandemic and the like have really caused people to flee their homes all throughout the region. And what we need is other countries to share in the responsibility to manage their borders, so that our border is not the first line of defense. It cannot be the first line of defense, because we in the Department of Homeland Security aren't built for the number of people that we are encountering every single day. We're just not resourced for it. So number one, our border cannot be the first line of defense. We need other countries to the south to manage their borders as well, and take responsibility. Next is we need to fix our system, because I've got to tell you, when somebody comes, most people now, when they come to the border in between the ports of entry, they don't try to evade law enforcement. They go right to law enforcement, to our Border Patrol agents, and make a claim for asylum under our laws. And that means they come into the system. And it takes 6 to 8 years to judge their cases. And that is just too long. And so we've got to make this system more efficient. We have a lot more challenges. It's a lot more complex than that. But one thing that we're doing also is we are really attacking the smuggling organizations in an unprecedented way. We are disrupting them, an approach that isn't popular domestically anymore. Remember the broken windows approach, where, traffic citation, whatever we can do to break up the bad guys, we're going to do it. Well, that's the approach we're taking with the smuggling organizations. And I have to tell you, their cruelty is illustrated very powerfully in the tragedy that was just experienced yesterday in San Antonio, where we have now, I think we have 50 people dying in the trailer of a truck that were seeking to enter, the United States illegally. But we have 50 people dead, some of whom are children. And that just exhibits the cruelty of the smuggling organizations, and why we need an all-of-government, and are executing an all-of-government attack against them.
Yeah, what a tragic event. It's without a doubt, Anthony. Yeah.
And it's not the first, I think it was in 2013. There were almost 30 found dead in a trailer, and the heat in that trailer back a number of years ago was estimated to be 175 degrees, and it's getting hot.
Yeah,
it's getting hotter, and the journey's that much more dangerous, and we gotta break it up.
no doubt. So I want to come back and talk about concerns of drug smuggling and all, but we go back and talk a little bit about the incentives. What incentives? Talk a little bit about the strategy of we shouldn't be the first line of defense. Obviously, there's a number of countries that this pipeline of people coming through. What are our initiatives? What are we doing in order to get other countries to recognize it? It's easy, I guess, in some ways, for them to say, "Let these problems pass right through and be somebody else's problems." So having that holistic approach is not always as easy as it may sound.
Yeah. So we've got a toolbox. We've got a toolbox of carrots and sticks.
Yeah.
And, these countries also understand increasingly that not everyone is just passing through, that quite a number may settle. The journey's dangerous, so it may settle in their respective, countries. And so they're invested in it as well. And we had a great meeting with all of the countries in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago, and everyone committed to addressing this in a united way, because it's a united challenge and a real serious one.
Yeah, no doubt, and it's not one that we're going to be able to fix our own. As long as that pipeline's there, it's putting us that burden on our border, our border cities, and border law enforcement, border patrol,
and local law enforcement,
everything, and quality of life as well. All of these things. So I appreciate that. Let's go back and talk about the smuggling. It's creating major problems for law enforcement, much further than just a border town. That flow of drugs. Can you talk a little bit more in depth about some of the actions taken by your agency and agencies, and also the partnership of local law enforcement, how we can work together in order to be able to address this, what we see as a rise in flow of narcotics coming across the border?
So that rise of President Yoes has been years long. If we take a look at the number of opioid overdose deaths in the United States, I think it was a 60% increase in 2020 over 2019, 2019 over 2018, and so on. It's just been, tragically, the demand in this country is great. And we've got to address that. But in the meantime, what the public needs to understand is the majority of the drugs that are smuggled into this country are not smuggled in between the ports of entry, but through the ports of entry, through the trucks, through the cars. That's how, you take a look at the migrants that come across. Most of them don't even have a suitcase, or, they might have a backpack. But we find our interdiction of drugs have increased. And frankly, thanks to the technology that the prior administration introduced towards the end of its administration in 2020, we have new technology, non-intrusive technology that is amazing at detecting narcotics and other contraband hidden in, compartments in trucks. And the ingenuity, the creativity of the criminals cannot be overstated, but we're on it. And so we have brought more of that technology. We have brought laboratories to the ports of entry. We've surged resources, and we're interdicting more drugs than ever before. But the drugs continue, to get in. The demand is so great, and so much money illegally is to be made, that it's, fundamentally we have to address it all. We have to address the demand, but we've got to address the criminals.
Well, no doubt that you're right. It is supply and demand, and that drives every market, including the illegal markets as well. So,
and you mentioned how we work with law enforcement. We've got local law enforcement. We've got great task force models.
Yeah,
and our HSI, our Homeland Security investigations personnel, are just working with local law enforcement seamlessly, and I'm fighting to get our HSI guys more authorities.
Yeah, it's with with the exception of border, but certainly the border towns and pretty much every city in this country, all of these things it touches all of them, and it's more than likely that local law enforcement is going to have the encounters
That's right.
before federal. So those task force, that working cooperation is vitally important for us to have any kind of, you know. Any type of larger success than just individual every now and then feeling good because we found something. There's a bigger network work here. So I appreciate that. Go back to the border for a second. It's we talk about the border and a manage of people coming into the country. We also see what's happening in Ukraine and the challenges there, and just. It just shows the stability of America and the things that we do. It's still a destination that many want to come to, and Ukraine is kind of an example. And so we have this influx of people, not just from the border, but we also have them from coming in, and they're going to cities across this country, not just Ukraine. But how do you coordinate the distribution of people coming either from the border or Ukraine into our communities, and how do we interact with local jurisdictions with the knowledge that they're coming?
So, well, we saw a number of Ukrainians arrive at our border, actually at a port of entry, predominantly in San Diego, California. But what we did was we built a program very quickly so that they wouldn't travel to Mexico and then try to come up through the port of entry. And now that has ended. They're really not coming to Mexico anymore, maybe in ones and twos, but not in any significant volume. And so we address urgencies as they arise. And obviously the war in Ukraine and the amount of suffering there is an urgency that we addressed. And so now we're bringing them by flights directly into the United States after they've applied and they have a sponsor here so that there's some stability to their arrival. We've been very focused on coordinating with local jurisdictions better than we have in the past, because we've heard from local law enforcement and others, listen, you got to let us know, when people are arriving. So we have we're ready. We're ready to accept them or address them however we need to. It's something I think that we just have to keep in mind. People will travel through one country and another to reach the United States. And there's a reason for that. We can't allow that, but there's a reason for it. And that's because they understand that this is the greatest country in the world. And I was in Europe last week to address counterterrorism and a number of other Homeland Security issues. And everyone looks to us. Yeah. Everyone looks to us. So we have to, the discourse, the conversations in this country are more divided than I ever remember them to be. And I think we need to pause sometimes and just say, whatever our differences are, we're part of, and we need to contribute to the greatest country in the world.
Yeah, it's this country was founded on the ability to have those political beliefs and entitled to have those political beliefs, and somehow we've gotten to a point now where we no longer respect other people's views, and so it's a lot of civility just disappeared in this country. So I can certainly appreciate that. But even with our challenges and the struggles that we have, we're still a great nation, which other people want to be part of. So I can certainly appreciate that. You brought up domestic terrorism and how we're handling not just domestic, but just counterterrorism. I'd like to kind of move into that area because we see such an increase in 2020, 2021. We have more and more incidents of domestic terrorism that we're seeing just regularly now. It's almost it's alarming just the frequency that's happening, and it falls under the purview of a rather large agency, Department of Homeland Security. So if we could kind of shift gears and let's move into that, because I do see it as a growing concern that we really need to get a handle on, and it's something that local law enforcement and Department of Homeland Security are going to have to coordinate with in order to have any success. So if we could just kind of move into that space.
Yeah. So our role in that is has a number of parts. First, we push out information and intelligence to local law enforcement, because those are, our frontline personnel. And so our job is to equip the local communities to address the challenge. And we do that with information, and we're doing that increasingly with more and more grant funding. And I think what we need to do is, very often, if we take a look at the tragedies in Buffalo and the tragedies in Uvalde, Texas, we see those assailants um, uh, having shown signs of antisocial behavior, mental health problems before they committed those heinous acts. And the question is, how do we equip family members, neighbors, faith leaders, teachers, to identify those signs and call someone to intervene? That is the key. And we're developing new programs to do that. The See Something, Say Something program that was created in the 2010, 2012 time period really speaks of that abandoned backpack in the airport, and you see that and call somebody. It doesn't really work with respect to the kid at school who's behaving differently than before and showing signs of concern. We've got to be able to address that. It's very often a mental health issue, but we've got to equip local communities to address it. And we're sending out information, we're providing training, we're providing funding, and we're building new programs. Some of the European countries have some very interesting programs that we're taking a close look at. People are free to express their views, however offensive we might consider them. I mean, that's what we're all about. We have very strong First Amendment principles, but when it's connected to violence, that's when it's unacceptable, and we step in.
Yeah, during my career, at times I worked in schools. At times I've worked with students who I guess displayed some of those concerns, antisocial, just alone, a lot of them. And I guess just to bring it in perspective, not every student who has these things are a school shooter.
That's right.
And the problem is, and I think most people, it's easy to look in hindsight and say there were a lot of signs. The reality is there's a lot of signs of students that are just struggling because of society today. And it's sort of unfair to say that all of them have the potential for it. It really needs to be more of an intervention of how do we address these issues long before they manifest into something of violence. I've always felt a lot of the reason we see some of this violence is it's almost glorified. It's glorified in Hollywood. It's glorified in social media. It's in a lot of ways, social media allows people to validate their belief systems.
And that's one of the greatest challenges, Mr. President. I got to tell you that these narratives spread so fast now on social media, online platforms. People are inspired by the massacre in New Zealand a number of years ago, and they learn of it on social media. But I think you're 100% right. Intervention is key. A small percentage, such a small percentage of people with mental health concerns actually, commit those violent acts. But those violent acts do so much damage in our country.
No doubt. And I guess it shows a little bit of the problem of law enforcement. These interventions aren't necessarily law enforcement functions, yet law enforcement is the one who we're the ones that I get stuck with. Not stuck. We're the ones that deal with the end result of these things. And it's easy in hindsight to recognize them. It does show that we have some, law enforcement is just one aspect to a holistic approach of addressing all of these issues. And in a lot of cases, it falls at the feet of law enforcement of whether or not law enforcement handled it properly or not. Those things need to be addressed long in advance through a number of programs.
This has got to be
our purview.
This has to be an all of society a commitment. We cannot put everything on the shoulders of law enforcement,
Yeah,
especially now.
yeah, it happens every day. And
Yes,
if
it does.
there's a problem, call the police. We're going to come there and we're going to fix it. That's where we are in society, and and in many ways that's why law enforcement is low hanging fruit of a lot of maybe failed promises in communities where the people are frustrated, and we take the brunt of it.
Well, I return to my comment that resolve is a really important human quality,
Yeah.
and law enforcement's an amazingly noble profession.
Yeah. We're starting to wrap this up, but are there any other programs that Department of Homeland Security that has in play now that you'd like to share with us on any of the such a wide range of responsibilities you have? I often wonder how you can drive a ship going in 6 different directions. It's not easy knowing all of the aspects that your agency oversees. But can you share with us anything that our law enforcement members might find interesting of programs that you have in place right now?
Yeah, I can take hours for that. I
Well,
mean, I will tell you,
let's take a stab at it.
yeah, our department is so enormous, both in scale of mission as well as in size. We have 250,000 people around the world. But when we talk about the border and the challenge of migration, the Coast Guard comes immediately to mind. They interdict people at sea. From Cuba, from Haiti, from the Dominican Republic, and like the Coast Guard and the search and rescue mission, the maritime security. We have our cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency that addresses a cybersecurity challenge. We, ransomware. Law enforcement departments have been attacked by ransomware around the country. We have FEMA. We used to say there was a fire season, there was a hurricane season. Now those seasons are gone. It's a year-round challenge. I was in Mayfield, Kentucky, and there was a tornado that just decimated the entire town. The entire town. We're seeing fires sweep New Mexico, Arizona, California, Colorado. So we have FEMA. We have the United States Secret Service. You know what they've had a very impactful message to my family. I talk to our daughters about law enforcement and my pride in having been a prosecutor, and my pride in supporting the men and women in law enforcement, and what it means to holster a firearm and pin a badge and walk out one's home, understanding that that day is putting one's life on the line for others. And it's a sacrifice that the entire family makes. And, my daughters have heard me over the years, but now they see, U.S. Secret Service personnel outside our home protecting us in the way that I described. We're TSA at the airport. I can go on and on. We have 23 agencies and offices in this department, and everybody does amazing work.
Yep, including law enforcement training.
Absolutely. We have FLETC.
Yeah. So if you could maybe talk a little bit about that, or how that benefits local law enforcement as well.
So we do a lot of training for local law enforcement, even though it's a federal law enforcement training center and its main campus is in Glencoe, Georgia. We provide a lot of training for local law enforcement. We're very proud to do so. And I'd love to hear from FOP members about what they, if they've gone to FLETC, and, what they've thought of it and what they think we can do better.
Great. So as we wrap this up, I'll give you a chance to maybe make some closing comments of anything we didn't cover that you think is important for our members to hear, our listeners to hear. Please share them with us.
President Yoes, I'd just like to thank your members, and I'd like to thank you for your leadership, and I want to thank your members for helping keep our community safe. That's what allows us to be the greatest country in the world.
Oh, great, man. Thank you very much for joining us. If someone wants to, if our members would like to learn a little bit more, maybe training opportunities, grant opportunities, what's the best place for them to go to get that information?
So I'd go on to dhs.gov, but maybe what we'll do is include in your next newsletter or some other means some specific resources that we can provide. We provided actually for the first ever law enforcement resource guide about all that we do for law enforcement. Maybe we can help circulate that to your members.
Well, Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for joining us and spending some time with us and sharing some information. Vitally important to our members and to our listeners. Thank you for joining in today and participating in our podcast, where we talk about the things that are vitally important to the men and women who suit up and show up every single day and make a difference in the communities they serve. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of The Blue View, hosted by Patrick Yoes, National President of the Fraternal Order of Police. To catch our next episode, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. To get the latest from the National FOP, make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at GLFOP and on Instagram at FOP National. Thanks again. See you next time.